Welcome to our deep dive into the pharmaceutical industry.
Oh, that
It's
sounds.
a world where scientific breakthroughs and big business collide.
And of course, life-saving treatments.
We're going to dissect excerpts from How to Do Business Analysis of Pharmaceutical Companies.
Okay.
It's by Dr. Vijay Malak, a SEBI-registered research analyst.
Oh,
His
wow.
insights are going to give you a real behind-the-scenes look at this whole industry.
I'm excited.
Ready to get started?
Absolutely. What's fascinating about his analysis is that I always pictured drug development as this high-tech, cutting-edge field.
Right.
But API manufacturing, where they make the active pharmaceutical ingredients, is surprisingly similar to producing, like, bulk chemicals. It's about raw materials, massive production, and cutthroat competition.
So instead of scientists in pristine labs, we're talking more like large-scale industrial production.
Exactly. And that's where the challenge of pricing power comes in.
Okay.
Even Loris Labs, the world's largest producer of APIs for HIV drugs, struggles with this.
Oh, wow.
They dominate the market, but they still face constant pressure to lower prices.
That's interesting. You'd think being the biggest player would give them more leverage.
Yeah, you would think so.
How do they address that pressure?
Well, they got strategic.
Okay.
Instead of relying solely on HIV drug APIs, they diversified.
Okay.
They expanded into APIs for other diseases like hepatitis C and oncology.
Wow.
And even ventured into producing formulations themselves.
So basically spreading their risk.
Exactly.
Smart move.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's API manufacturing.
Yeah, right.
What about formulation companies?
Sure.
Dr. Malik draws a sharp distinction between innovator companies developing brand new drugs and generic companies producing existing ones.
Uh-huh.
That sounds like a recipe for tension.
It definitely creates an interesting dynamic.
Right.
Innovator companies are the risk takers.
All right.
They pour resources into developing new drugs, facing astronomical R&D costs and long development timelines.
Right.
It's a gamble.
Yeah.
Dr. Millick points out that only 1 in 15,000 discovered drugs actually becomes financially viable.
Oh, wow.
Those are some seriously long odds.
It makes you realize how much goes on behind the scenes before a drug even hits the market.
Yeah.
It's not just about scientific discovery, it's also a huge financial gamble.
Absolutely. And then, even if an innovator company does hit the jackpot, they face the looming threat of patent expiration.
Oh, right.
That's when generic companies can step in, produce the same drug without the initial development costs,
Yeah.
and offer it at a fraction of the price.
Wow.
Often up to 90% cheaper.
That's a massive difference.
It is.
No wonder there's so much competition in this field.
Right.
So let's dive deeper into these innovator companies first.
Okay.
What are some of the biggest hurdles they face in this high-stakes game of new drug development?
Well, as we mentioned, the R&D costs are massive.
Right.
We're talking upwards of $500 million to bring a new drug to market.
Good.
And the development process itself can eat up a significant portion of the patent life, leaving a limited window for profit before generics enter the picture.
So they're racing against the clock to recoup their investment.
Exactly.
It must make those investment decisions incredibly difficult.
It certainly adds another layer of complexity.
Right.
And the industry's shift towards antibody-based drugs is making things even more challenging.
Oh.
These drugs are incredibly complex to develop, pushing those development costs even higher.
We've seen examples of this, right?
Yeah.
Like when Gilead acquired Pharmacet for a whopping $11 billion to snag a promising hepatitis C drug candidate. That's a bold bet on a single drug.
It is. But that's the nature of this industry.
Yeah.
High risk, high reward.
Right.
Now, on the other side of the coin, generic companies may not have those massive upfront costs.
Right.
But they face a different set of challenges.
Right. They're navigating a market that's already crowded with existing drugs.
Yeah.
How do they manage to compete and make a profit in that environment?
Dr. Malik highlights a few interesting strategies.
Right.
One is focusing on complex generics like biosimilars.
Biosimilars, that's a term I've heard but don't fully understand.
Yeah, it's a little...
Can you break it down for me?
Essentially, they're like generic versions of biologic drugs.
Oh, okay.
They're much more complex to manufacture than your typical generic pill,
Okay.
which means fewer companies can produce them.
Hmm.
Less competition, potentially higher profits.
So it's a way for them to carve out a niche in a crowded market.
Exactly.
But I imagine there are some challenges with biosimilars as well.
Oh, definitely.
Oh,
The regulatory hurdles are just as high as for new drugs.
wow.
Plus, innovator companies are fiercely protective of their patents
Right.
and often try to block biosimilar development through legal means. It can turn into a real legal battleground.
Wow. So it's not just about science and manufacturing. It's also about navigating the legal system.
Right.
What other strategies do generic companies use?
Well, in the US, there's a system that grants the first generic company to get approval a 6-month head start
Oh,
before other generic competitors can enter the market.
interesting. So there's a real incentive to be the first one through the door.
Absolutely. It allows that company to command higher prices during that initial period and boost their profits. But that first-to-market advantage is fiercely contested.
Oh, I bet.
Some companies even try to launch their generics before the patent expires
Oh, wow.
by challenging the innovator's patent in court.
That sounds risky.
It's a high-stakes gamble known as a Para 4 filing.
Okay.
The outcomes are uncertain, and the legal battles can be expensive.
Wow. It's fascinating how many different strategies are at play in this industry.
Right.
And Dr. Malik's analysis points out a particularly interesting tactic used in India,
Okay.
branded generics.
Yes, that's where things get a bit tricky, ethically speaking.
Okay.
Remember how we said all generic versions of a drug are essentially the same?
Uh-huh.
Well, in India, some companies have found ways to create a perception of difference among their generic products,
Interesting.
even though the active ingredients are identical.
How do they do that?
Clever branding and marketing.
Okay.
They give these generics catchy brand names
Right.
and invest in marketing campaigns to create the impression that their branded generic is somehow superior to other generic versions,
Okay.
often justifying a higher price tag.
So it's about perception rather than actual differences in the drug itself.
Exactly.
Has anyone investigated this practice?
The Competition Commission of India, or CCI, they found that the same companies often produce multiple brands of the same generic drug, selling them at varying prices.
Oh, wow.
Sometimes even manufacturing branded and unbranded versions in the same facility.
That's a bit unsettling.
Yeah.
It seems like consumers might be paying a premium for a perception of quality rather than a real difference in the product.
That's the concern. This practice, along with high incentives given to retailers to promote certain brands, has contributed to inflated drug prices in India. The CCI even recommended a policy of one company, one drug, one brand, name one price to tackle this issue.
Wow.
Yeah.
A bold move to bring more transparency and fairness to the market.
It would be a significant shift if implemented.
Right.
Now let's switch gears and explore the world of CRAMS.
Yeah.
Contract Research and Manufacturing Services.
CRAMS, that was another of those terms I wasn't familiar with.
Right.
What exactly do they do?
Think of them as specialized contractors for the pharmaceutical industry,
Okay.
primarily working with innovator companies.
Okay.
They might provide research services to help develop new drugs. Or they might offer manufacturing services to produce those drugs according to the innovator's specifications.
So they're like the behind-the-scenes support team,
Exactly.
offering their expertise and resources to help get those new drugs to market.
Exactly.
And India has become a major hub for CRAMS.
It has.
Largely because of its lower costs.
Right.
But lower costs often mean more competition, right?
You hit the nail on the head.
All right.
The barrier to entry in the CRAMS field is relatively low, so there's intense competition.
Right.
This drives down profit margins and can make it tough to gain pricing power.
Makes sense.
CRAMS companies often rely heavily on a small number of key clients.
That makes sense if you're providing a specialized service.
Right.
Your success is tied to landing those big contracts.
Yeah.
But that must make them vulnerable if they lose a major client.
Absolutely. And winning those contracts isn't easy.
Or that.
It's a long process,
Yeah?
often involving rigorous audits and technology transfers.
Wow.
So how do they survive, let alone thrive?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
What are some of the strategies they use?
Well, achieving scale is crucial.
Okay.
Larger CRAMS companies can benefit from economies of scale,
Right.
making them more cost-efficient.
Right.
They can also expand their product portfolios, offering a wider range of services to attract more clients
Right.
and reduce dependence on any single customer.
So it's about diversification and adaptability.
Yeah,
Kind of like what we saw with Loris Labs in the API market.
exactly. Now, finally, let's talk about the often overlooked but essential link in the pharmaceutical chain,
Oh, yeah.
distribution.
Those are the folks responsible for getting the drugs from the manufacturers to the consumers, right?
Yep.
But there's more to it than just delivering pills, isn't there?
There's a whole ecosystem involved,
Right.
from clearing and forwarding agents to wholesalers, stockists, and retailers.
Right.
And we've seen the rise of corporate players in this space,
Yep.
both offline like Apollo pharmacies and online like 1 milligram pharmacy and NetMeds.
So the distribution landscape is changing with new players and new ways of getting drugs to people.
Exactly. And here's a point that Dr. Malik emphasizes.
Yep.
Distributors often enjoy high trade margins, particularly in India.
Isn't that partly due to some anti-competitive practices that the CCI has been investigating?
You're right.
Yeah.
The CCI has found instances of distributor associations requiring mandatory NOCs for new stockists,
Right.
limiting competition and allowing them to control discounts and collectively set trade margins. Ultimately, this can impact the prices consumers pay for their medications.
So it's not just the drug manufacturers influencing prices, but also these behind-the-scenes players in the distribution chain.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the government is trying to address this by implementing measures like capping margins on essential drugs and running pilot programs to cap margins on specific drug categories,
Okay.
like anti-cancer drugs.
It's a complex issue with no easy solutions. But it sounds like they're trying to find ways to balance the interests of distributors with the need to make medications more affordable for consumers.
Exactly. And this situation contrasts sharply with developed markets like Japan and the U.S., where lower trade margins have led to consolidation in the distribution sector.
So different market dynamics lead to different approaches in distribution.
Absolutely. And it just goes to show that even the seemingly simple act of getting drugs from point A to point B is a nuanced part of this complex industry.
Right.
We've covered a lot of ground exploring the different segments and some of the key challenges they face.
Right.
But Dr. Malik's analysis also points to several overarching factors that influence the entire pharmaceutical landscape.
Okay.
Ready to dive into those?
Definitely. These broader factors must be critical for anyone trying to understand how this industry really works.
They are, and they provide valuable insights for investors, healthcare professionals, and anyone interested in the future of medicine.
Okay, so we've explored all the different players in the pharma game, from those creating the raw ingredients to those getting the final product into our hands.
Right.
Now, what about those overarching factors that shape the entire industry? Where do we even begin?
Well, Dr. Malik points to several key influences.
Okay.
And one that really stands out is the concept of stable demand.
Right.
Unlike some industries that are vulnerable to economic downturns, the demand for healthcare remains relatively constant.
Right.
People get sick, they need treatment.
Yeah.
That need doesn't disappear just because the economy takes a hit.
So in a way, the pharmaceutical industry is somewhat insulated from those economic swings that can rock other sectors.
Exact.
Makes sense. You can't put off treating a serious illness because of a recession.
Precisely. It's a factor that makes this industry attractive to investors.
Right.
It offers a level of stability you don't find in many other areas.
Right.
But on the flip side, there's also significant regulatory risk.
Right, and for good reason. Yeah. We want to make sure the medications we're taking are safe and effective.
Of course.
But what does regulatory risk actually mean for these companies?
It means a heavy burden of compliance.
Okay.
Companies need to navigate a complex web of regulations,
Right.
meet stringent standards,
Yeah.
and constantly adapt to evolving requirements. Failing to comply can result in hefty fines,
Right.
delays in getting products to market, or even bans on certain drugs.
Wow.
It can have a huge impact on a company's bottom line.
So it's a constant balancing act for them.
Yeah.
Driving innovation, maintaining profitability, and ensuring they're ticking all the regulatory boxes.
You got it.
And then, of course, there's the constant pressure of pricing.
That's a huge factor.
Yeah.
Governments, insurance providers,
Right.
and the rise of generic competition all contribute to this pressure, pushing companies to continually evaluate their pricing strategies.
Right.
It's a delicate dance.
Yeah.
They need to balance profitability with affordability, especially in markets where healthcare costs are a major concern.
It sounds like a real tightrope walk, especially for those innovator companies that have poured so much into R&D.
It is.
Speaking of R&D, that's another one of those crucial factors, right?
Absolutely. Continuous investment in research and development is the lifeblood of this industry.
Okay.
It's not just about discovering the next blockbuster drug.
Right.
It's about continuously improving existing products, finding new ways to manufacture drugs more efficiently, and basically staying ahead of the curve.
So it's about adapting and innovating to stay competitive.
Exactly.
And it's not just about one single product.
Right.
It's about managing that product's entire life cycle.
You've hit on another key point.
Okay.
Every drug has a limited lifespan from its initial launch into the market
Right.
through its peak sales period
Right.
and eventually to patent expiration and decline.
Yep.
Companies need to carefully manage this life cycle to ensure a steady flow of new products to replace those facing dwindling sales.
It's like they're constantly juggling, trying to keep all those balls in the air at once.
It's a lot.
They've got to have new drugs in the pipeline, navigate regulations, manage costs, and stay ahead of the competition.
Yeah.
It's a complex and demanding environment.
It is.
And it's one where, as Dr. Malik observes, big often gets bigger.
That's right.
That's a point you've touched on before.
Yeah.
The idea that larger companies have a distinct advantage. Why is that?
Well, they have greater scale,
Okay.
which often translates into lower production costs.
Right.
They have more bargaining power when negotiating with suppliers and distributors. And they have more resources to invest in R&D and navigate complex regulatory challenges.
Right.
It creates a kind of snowball effect.
Okay.
Size leads to competitive advantages, which further fuels growth and market dominance.
So it's not just about developing a great product. It's also about having the infrastructure and resources to play the long game in this industry.
Exactly. And this dynamic isn't limited to individual companies.
Okay.
It also plays out on a national level. Think about countries like the U.S.
Yeah.
They've established themselves as dominant forces in the global pharmaceutical market.
The U.S. seems to be a major player in both drug innovation and generic drug production.
Right.
What makes it such a magnet for companies worldwide?
Well, for one, it's a huge market.
Right.
And the U.S. system, with its relatively less stringent price controls compared to some other countries, makes it a particularly lucrative target for pharmaceutical companies.
That explains why it's such a competitive market.
It is.
Everyone wants a piece of that pie.
Exactly. And we see this focus on the U.S. market reflected in the strategies of Indian pharmaceutical companies as well. A significant chunk of their revenue comes from exports, with a large portion of those exports going to the U.S.
Okay.
They're not just serving the domestic market, they're competing on a global stage.
It's impressive, really, to see how the Indian pharmaceutical industry has grown and expanded its reach.
It's
a testament to their ambition and adaptability.
definitely. Now, if we take a step back and look at the bigger picture,
Okay.
we can see how all these factors, the demand, the regulations, the competition, the need for R&D, the life cycle management, all contribute to this complex and ever-evolving industry.
Right.
It's a lot.
It's like a giant, intricate machine with all these interconnected parts working together.
Yeah.
And at the heart of it all is this constant tension between innovation and affordability.
You've hit the nail on the head. Innovator companies need to invest heavily in R&D
Right.
to bring those groundbreaking new therapies to market.
Right.
But those investments come at a cost, leading to higher drug prices. Then generic companies step in to offer more affordable alternatives,
Right.
which puts pressure on innovator companies to maintain their competitive edge.
Yeah.
It's a constant push and pull.
A balancing act that drives both scientific advancements and access to life-saving treatments. It is.
But it also raises some challenging questions.
It does. There are concerns about the sustainability of the innovator model,
Right.
especially as development costs continue to rise and patent lifespans get squeezed, impacting profit margins.
And from a societal perspective, there's the question of how we incentivize innovation,
Right.
while also ensuring essential medications remain affordable and accessible to everyone who needs them.
Big question.
There's no easy answer to that.
It's a complex issue with far-reaching consequences.
Yeah.
And it raises an important question for you as someone engaging with this material.
Okay.
How do you see the pharmaceutical industry evolving over the next 5-10 years? What trends do you think will shape its future?
That's a question that really makes you stop and think. It's like peering into a crystal ball, trying to make sense of all these different forces at play.
It is.
What do you think will be the biggest game changer in the next decade?
Well, one area that I think holds immense potential is personalized medicine.
Treatments tailored to an individual's unique genetic makeup.
Yeah.
It's about moving away from that one-size-fits-all approach and developing therapies that are more targeted and more effective for each individual.
So almost like custom-designed medications just for you.
Exactly.
It sounds like something out of science fiction.
A little bit, yeah, but
It makes sense everyone responds differently to treatments.
right.
So why not tailor those treatments to our own individual needs?
Exactly. And with the advances in genetic testing and data analysis,
Right.
personalized medicine is becoming more and more attainable. It's definitely an area to watch.
It makes me wonder if we'll see a shift in focus from treating diseases after they occur to preventing them altogether.
Yeah,
More emphasis on preventative care and early intervention.
I think that's very likely.
Okay.
Imagine a future where we can identify your risk factors early on
Right.
and intervene with lifestyle changes, targeted therapies, or even gene editing to prevent those diseases from ever developing.
That's a pretty mind-blowing concept.
Yeah. It really highlights the potential for transformative change in healthcare.
It does.
Yeah.
And it underscores why it's so crucial to stay informed and engaged with these issues,
Right.
even if you're not directly involved in the pharmaceutical world.
I completely agree. Whether you're an investor, a patient, or simply a curious citizen, understanding how this industry works can empower you to make more informed decisions about your health, your finances, and even the future of healthcare as a whole.
Absolutely. It's about being an informed participant in these conversations, asking the right questions, and advocating for the kind of healthcare system we want to see.
So let's take a moment to recap the key takeaways from our deep dive into Dr. Malik's insights.
Okay.
We've seen how the pharmaceutical industry is this complex and interconnected web,
Right.
with each segment playing a crucial role, from the folks making those raw ingredients to those delivering those life-saving treatments.
Absolutely.
We've delved into the challenges of innovation, the constant pressure of competition.
The intricacies of regulations and the strategic maneuvering of companies trying to thrive in this demanding environment.
For sure.
We've explored how those big picture factors like stable demand, the need for R&D,
Right.
and that big gets bigger dynamic shape the entire landscape.
Yes.
And we've touched on some of the ethical and economic considerations that add another layer of complexity to this already intricate puzzle.
You did.
A lot to absorb. But hopefully, this deep dive has given you a clearer picture of how this vital industry works, the forces that drive it, and the challenges it faces.
It is a lot.
And perhaps most importantly, it sparked your curiosity to continue exploring these issues, asking questions and engaging in those important conversations about the future of healthcare.
I hope so.
But before we wrap things up, I wanted to leave you with a final thought to ponder.
Okay.
We've discussed how companies are constantly striving to develop new drugs and treatments.
Right.
But what if the next big breakthrough doesn't come from a pill or an injection? What if it comes from a completely different approach, like harnessing the power of the human microbiome, or leveraging artificial intelligence to personalize treatment in ways we can't even fathom yet?
Yeah.
That's a really intriguing question.
Yeah.
We're in an era of unprecedented scientific advancement, and the potential for transformative change in healthcare is immense.
Right.
It's an exciting time to be paying attention,
It is.
and we encourage you to stay curious, stay informed, and keep asking those tough questions.
Keep learning.
Because ultimately, it's about shaping a future where healthcare is not just effective, but also accessible and equitable for everyone.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of pharmaceuticals.